accountant should be your trusted advisor,
Yeah.
but no one ever really talks about what exactly does that mean. I think at the end of the day, let's keep it really, really simple. That that person should be somebody that answers your email and picks up the phone when you call. It really starts there. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, the profession, because I see this day in and day out relative to prospective clients and listening to the aches and pains as to why we're even on the phone to begin with. And 9 out of 10 of them start with, hey, I don't get a response to an email. When I call, not only do they not pick up, but I don't get a call back. Um, you know, Once we get over that hurdle, then great. The next part of that, though, is really going to be, can we relate? Do we get along? Are we going to be a peer to peer type relationship? We can bring the skill set to any relationship, no matter how difficult it may be.
Hey, everybody. You are not going to want to miss the podcast today with Steve Poliseo, partner at Citron Cooperman. We're going to talk about Steve Poliseo himself, great accountant in the New Jersey market here. We're going to talk about Citron Cooperman and what separates them. We're going to get into the banker and accountant relationship and how, as a banker and as an accountant, it's so important for you to collaborate with those people and really assemble your allies to put together the dream team to really help serve the client. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. You're going to get a lot of personal insights from Steve, a lot of professional insights, but it's something you're not going to want to miss. Look forward to you joining us today. Steve Poliseo, what's going on, brother? How are you today?
Mr. Fisher, I'm doing well. How about yourself?
It sounds like we've known each other for a long time.
A year or two, maybe.
A year or two. I'm trying to think how many years it's been. I mean, it was when I would consider myself a baby banker that we met, and you actually gave me a shot on a deal or two, and then here we are. It has to be 10 years later.
Yeah, I think you would know that. I mean, it's one of those things that anything happening pre-COVID kind of becomes a blur, and then you forget exactly where we are. So the whole event timeline gets skewed. But yeah, 10 years is probably about accurate.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So you were one of the first probably accountants that I met as a banker, in my career. And, I want to make this super valuable to the listeners. So let's hear a little bit about you and then let's kind of get into that banker accountant relationship. I'd like to get into that
Sure.
more, but let's hear a little bit about Steve Policio. Kind of, tell us your, you know, growing up and then kind of getting into your professional life. How did that all get started?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you the quick view because the rest of it's probably pretty boring. But so real quick. New Jersey, born and bred, raised, been here my entire life. Um, all the way through college years at College of New Jersey. Got into accounting, knowing that I wanted to be in business, needed it in the business world, needed to declare a major, and accounting starts with A, so that was the path of least resistance.
No influence from family or
And
business, like,
now,
your family was involved with like, what were your parents involved with?
now, so I'm a blue collar background guy. I am the second person in my family to graduate from college. My father being the first, and his graduation was the day before mine. So
Wow.
he was dead set on being the first one. So it took him 14 years, but that got accelerated as I was approaching my graduation day. So yeah, I went to his graduation ceremony the day before my graduation ceremony, and we had a combined college graduation party with my father.
I never knew that. So what did he get his degree in?
So he's got a general business degree. Didn't really need it for work. It's just something that was a goal of his that he ended up doing, and I'm nothing short of proud of him. And I give him first generation, first person. He can take all the credit in the world because we're now busy professionals ourselves, and thinking
That's
about
awesome.
finding the time to get a 4 year degree on nights and weekends is raising 4 children. It's a bit mind boggling to consider that he actually did it.
That's awesome, though. No, that's super, super meaningful. It's funny, though, you should have tried to beat him, and just tried to get it, like, a day
No,
before or something.
I can't control when the ceremony was. I mean, I
Okay.
couldn't say technically my last final was before his last final, but I'll give him credit for his ceremony was the night before mine. So um,
Awesome. Awesome.
yeah,
So
so
you so so you just literally alphabetized all the professions
Yeah,
A is for
and
accounting, and then you got into accounting, and so
even to the point, even to the point where I was at TCNJ, I was getting my degree and saying, you know what, this accounting thing is not really for me, and I wanted to switch to finance, and in order to switch majors, sat down with the dean of the school, and the dean of the school was like, I'm not letting you. You're doing well. You can graduate with an accounting degree and go into finance. You can't graduate with a finance degree and go into accounting. So you're going to stay in accounting, and that's what I did. What he didn't tell me is that all the recruiters that you're going to get in the fall of your senior year are all going to be accounting firms, and there's not going to be very many finance firms that are going to be recruiting accounting majors. So lo and behold, I ended up in accounting. Uh, in hindsight, it's the greatest thing that ever happened. And started my professional career at a large regional firm. Then went to a smaller tax centered firm that we did tax controversy work. Controversy being representation in front of the IRS, New Jersey sales tax, New York sales tax. And then a client that we represented wanted me to come on board as a CFO, which being in my late 20s, why not?
what industry were they in?
So they were in wholesale distribution. So we bought in bulk, and we sold in smaller units on a business to business standpoint.
Nice.
Mostly packaging and janitorial supplies.
Nice.
So CFO at a company that probably didn't need a CFO. So my role quickly turned into COO, as well as CFO, as well as a variety of other roles that you would get in a small business environment, which is part of the reason why I'm at where I am today, is because of that 2.5 year period that I was on the other side of the phone call,
Yeah.
the other side of the email, and really brings into perspective you know the things that the family owned business owner are going through on a day-to-day basis, as it pertains to just getting their product to market,
Yeah.
and then having to deal with the professionals in the background that are of importance, but are often a nuisance along the way, and saying, hey, how are we going to make this, how are we going to build a better mousetrap out of this professional service model?
Yeah. I just think it's hilarious though, right? Because I've known you for 10 plus years now. We're personal friends. And I've known of these things, but it's interesting to me that to hear these things, I'm learning something new, right? You had an interest in finance, but that's something that you've been very good at in supporting your clients with those, going after those, different things, they're securing finance, et cetera. But then this experience that you've had as a CFO,
Mhm.
that gives you that advisory component that you need. And it's interesting, right? Because I was gonna bring that up today, which with accounting that I just think is really funny. Good friend, some a mutual friend that you know as well, Dave Capadano from Clifton Larson and Allen. He said to me a long time ago, he's like, Michael, I was kind of going through a transition in my life, and I he said, you'd be a great accountant. And I said, well, how do you figure? And he goes, well, he goes, you're smart enough, and I'm not saying this about you, Steve, because you're a lot smarter than I am when it comes to numbers and stuff. But you have a personality, and that's the one thing that we find in the accounting world. Is there's tons of really book smart people, but
Mhm.
it's less people that can have the conversation. And the one thing that I feel like has always separated you, and now I understand it a lot more now, is just because you've had that experience of being on the other side of it, right? The thing that I know and I'm happy to refer you business and connect you with clients of mine is because the most valuable thing that you bring to me is advice. It's not the accounting, it's not the balance sheet and the P&L. It's and I hear you say this all the time when we talk about different opportunities we're working on, is you'll sit down and you'll go, yeah, this doesn't make sense for this company, right? And you can back it up with the reasons and the accounting reasons why it doesn't make sense for somebody. But that's something that about you that really separates you, I think, from the pack.
Yeah, so let's not be so boastful to say that I'm going to do a tax return so much better than somebody else. And quite frankly, being at a firm such as Citron Cooperman, we're 3,500 people in 27 offices, across the country and internationally. is that we built the team of people to make sure that the commodity side, the tax returns, those deliverables are done and they're done right. Um, and we can do that equal to several other firms that are out there that are of the same size or lesser. The reality of it is that what's going to set you apart is number one, relating to a client, to that business owner, having an understanding of what it is that they're going through, and then being part of their advisory team. Um, I'm not a vendor. I'm not somebody at the end of the year. We talk one time a year, and you send me your stuff, and a week later, 2 weeks later, a month later, you get a tax return. It's a relationship based business that involves constant communication, whatever mechanism it is. Every client's has my cell phone,
Yeah.
that they call and text on. It's a blessing and a curse, but the fact of the matter is that that's the expectation of how we work together. I adopted the mentality that you don't pay me to tell you yes, you pay me to give you an honest opinion as to what I think. What I think may be wrong, but the process of getting to my wrong conclusion often is because it is a Q and A that ends up with the business owner, the one that's ultimately taking the risk, um, having a more educated baseline to go take that risk. I get a lot of, Steve, that sounds great, but I'm going to go do this anyway.
Yeah.
Um, and great, and I wish that it turns out to be successful. And I never will end that conversation with "and I told you so" when it's not,
Yeah.
because that's part of the process.
So for the listeners then, I mean, the one thing I hear you saying, the one word that comes to mind when I hear you talk is collaboration, right? And it's collaborating, you are essentially, an extension of the management team. For the listeners, you know, when you're trying to evaluate, your relationship with your accountant, what's the one thing that you would tell people to really look for in that relationship? Because, I'm sure that we have a lot of people, a lot of listeners here that are either just starting out, have been in this for a while, or are getting kind of closer to the tail end of their business. But,
Mhm.
you know, as business owners and as businesses are continuing to grow and evolve, what should they be looking for in that relationship with their accountant?
Yeah, so it everybody falls back on that catchphrase, trusted advisor.
Yeah.
Well, your accountant should be your trusted advisor.
Yeah.
But no one ever really talks about what exactly does that mean. I think at the end of the day, let's keep it really, really simple. That that person should be somebody that answers your email and picks up the phone when you call. It really starts there. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, the profession, because I see this day in and day out relative to prospective clients and listening to the aches and pains as to why we're even on the phone to begin with. And 9 out of 10 of them start with, hey, I don't get a response to an email. When I call, not only do they not pick up, but I don't get a call back. Um, you know, Once we get over that hurdle, then great. The next part of that, though, is really going to be, can we relate? Do we get along? Are we going to be a peer to peer type relationship? We can bring the skill set to any relationship, no matter how difficult it may be. And we have, I can either do it direct, or we have the teams of people that can support that, whether it's merger and acquisition or transaction advisory or international issues or state and local tax. That's what we've built here to deliver that to clients. Um, I'm the quarterback or the point person to that, but that new person starting out, what do they need, what do they should they be looking for in that relationship? It's not, hey, it worked out for my parents, it's going to work out for me. It's a peer to peer communication. You use the word collaboration, which is perfect. It's Is this somebody that I want on my advisory team, a partner sitting next to me at the table when I need that person sitting next to me at the table. um
I just think it's funny that you say this, right? And it's like, we have a mutual client that we both work with together. People ask me all the time, like, well, how are you successful in your business? And then people ask you too, like, well, how have you become such a successful CPA? It's really all pretty simple. It's just pick up the phone,
yep.
be honest, be open. And that's the one thing that I feel like, the one thing that people don't think about is, right, like, when you assemble your allies, that's the one key phrase that I'm really into this year is assemble your allies, right? Is like you essentially, with your accountant, with your trusted advisor, as you say, right? You need to be open, fully open, and say, here's all the things that keep me up at night. Here's the things that I'm excited about. Here's the things that really worry me. And if you can share that with your team or that trusted advisor or the allies that you have within that circle, you're gonna get a lot better advice and be able to make a lot better decisions when you have that.
I seek out relationships with their other professionals and the other people that are part of their network, whether that's, whether it's their bankers, their financial advisors, their insurance professionals, their legal team. Because there's a lot of times where, you know, we get pulled or pushed into this, let's make a decision in a vacuum, without having, those other points of view or those other sides, all collaborating and being part of, what's in the best interest of, the individual or the entity that, ultimately is going to be, number one, paying for the advice, but also the beneficiary of the advice.
So I guess like to just break that down, right? Is for for our listeners here with your relationship with your accountant, right? Is you want to make sure that it's going to be somebody that's going to be able to answer the phone, someone that's going to be able to meet with you regularly, and someone that you feel comfortable about talking about the good parts of your business and the bad parts, right? Because by talking about those bad parts, it helps you kind of find out what's around the corner, right? And be able to anticipate those things and prepare for those things.
Yeah, I mean, you as a business owner are, and let's say you're first generation, and let's say you started the business 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago. What do you know your business, and what do I know? So I've been, on the professional service side, and I've represented thousands of clients over a 25 plus year time frame. And those thousands of clients have had all kinds of experiences. And those experiences are often things that are ahead of you as the business owner that you don't even know are coming yet, that I've already seen happen 45 times.
Yeah.
So we can sit there and talk, and you and I can have a conversation. I can say, you know what, Michael, this is the way it's going to go. If we line it up this way, because this is, what history has said, this is the way it's going to go. Or we can start to look to pivot now or do things different. um, and that's where the relationship side of the professional services really are valuable to every single client, because there's not a lot that's happened out there that I haven't seen in some way, shape, or form, um, over again 25 plus years of you know doing this with a certain level of passion, and not just waking up and let's go do some tax returns today. It's
That does not sound like very much fun.
it's not, and unfortunately, that's one of the 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 downsides to this profession, is that unfortunately that's what a lot of people think, and that's why you know people entering college now and graduating, there's just a lack of interest in getting into this profession. But what I think is lacking is the message. And the message isn't telling people that it's really the consulting. It's really significantly beyond putting numbers in boxes.
Yeah,
Um, and there is a science
absolutely.
to it and an art to it. Don't get me wrong, but and there's a right way and there's a wrong way. But it's really what are we talking about when we're talking about who we service, and who we service are those business owners. That's the
Absolutely.
core of it.
So I think it's this is a good segue to just, to talk about this. And this is something you and I have talked about in the past, right? Is a lot of our listeners here are going to be former colleagues of mine and stuff, that are in the banking space. You know, let's talk a little bit about the banker and accounting relationship. And I have to laugh and I have to say this, right? And I can probably take a little bit of credit here to say that I have actually referred you business in the past,
You
right?
have, correct.
Right, because it's typically, what I remember when I first, started in banking, there was, the New Jersey Society of CPAs. I would, go to the junior CPA, NJCPA events, right? And it would be me trying to build rapport with these younger CPAs in hopes of having a relationship with them in the future, because every team leader that I had when I was in, spent my time in commercial finance, they said, "You have to get in there with an accountant." You know, But what I wanna get into it with you is, like, how important it is to really build that relationship with accountants and bankers, they just work so well hand in hand,
Mhm.
and I think we're a great case study for a great relationship that can happen, in 2 people collaborating on a regular basis and being able to do good things together, I'd recommend to any of the listeners here, if you haven't formed a really good relationship with an accountant, you should go out and do that. And I think what's made us special, and I don't want to take away from what you would add to this, because I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. But I always look at I'd been blessed enough in my career to be able to only do business with people that I actually like. And I always say, like, are you the type of person that I would invite over for dinner with my wife and my daughter? And would you be accepted at my dinner table to have a conversation? And that's what I felt like with you now is, we're beyond, professional acquaintances.
Right.
We're personally friends. I like, know, trust you. You and I have a lot of the same values, but we spend a lot of time on that, which then helps, facilitate more of a business relationship for
Sure.
it.
So, I mean, obviously, we're talking about the relationship and how do bankers and accountants work together, and you kind of hit the message of the junior banker, go meet accountants, and guess who else is being told that? Every financial advisor in the world and every
Exactly.
payroll representative in the world, and our doorbell door is being knocked on a daily basis by all these people that are give me a client, give me a client, give me a client, give me and that's the way it is. And the profession's earned that, and it's a privilege to be in that seat and be considered that way. But going to how we grew, the reality of it is that we grew because you were a resource to me, and whether you knew it or not. And part of that resource is, me picking up the phone, you answering it, me saying, "Hey, I have this scenario. I have a client that's going through this. What do you think from a banker point of view? What should they do? What shouldn't they do? There may never be a financing opportunity out of this, but let's talk about it. Hey, Michael, what's going on in the market? What's going on, trending? Where are you seeing banks active in the lending side, whether it's owner occupied real estate, whether it's multifamily, whether it's working capital lines, what are interest rates, what are you guys looking for? Because guess what I do with that information? So I pick up the phone and I call one, two, five, 15 different clients, and part of that conversation is now making me look good, because I'm not just talking about taxes. I'm bringing to them information that they don't have to go get from a banker,
Yeah.
that they can get from me. And what happens in turn is that you and I build that relationship. I get that client that says, "Hey, I'm not really happy with my banking relationship. He's not talking to me," and then I can pick up the phone and call and say, "Hey, Michael, I got an opportunity." Um, and
I guess that's the thing, right? It's like, and I'm not, I don't, this is not, hey, Steve, make my, blow up my head here, right? But, as an accountant, you know, for other bankers that are listening out here that say like, "Hey, I really want to develop a lot of business in
Mhm.
2025. I really want to get out there." What is it that a good accountant like yourself, right, is really looking for in that banking relationship? Like, what separates the good bankers from the bad bankers that are out
Yeah,
there?
so I'd love to say it's the bank behind you, but in a lot of cases, it's really not. In some cases, it is, because you're kind of handcuffed by what the underwriters want to do and what the direction the bank is.
Well, I always say it's not the name at the top of the business card. It's in the middle, right? And that's the same way that I've always looked at
100%.
you, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, I can backtrack to our first conversation, and part of that backtrack to our first conversation is if I ever bring a deal to the table, I either want a fast no or a hard yes. Let's not say yes, and then 3, 4, 5 weeks, if not months down the road, we're now sitting at a no. And to the extent that you can honor that, because I mean, selfishly, that makes me look good. If
Absolutely.
I can go, or looks makes me look really bad if I go down the road with a client. They spend a lot of time, energy, and resources into getting financing that at the end of the day, somebody behind a desk, doesn't know what's happening and that ends up putting a no stamp on a file. That's paramount for me.
Yeah.
It's the relationship to me is the client. The other part of it too is, and this is the message to the bankers out there. The type of relationship that they should have with the CPAs that are working with their existing clients. So you have clients, that the bank lends to, that you work with, that you have contact points. Those contact points really should be with the accountant that's doing the tax returns and preparing the financial statements as well. Because there's plenty of times where year-end planning. I'm balancing covenants with what the client wants, which is the lowest tax bill that they can come up with. But I need to make sure that we're in compliance with covenants. Or we're at 6 month internal review, and I see that they're not trending in the right direction. Um, you and I have a relationship. I'm picking up the phone. I'm calling you and saying, hey, just want to let you know, here's where we stand, here's where they're trending. Let's make sure that we're all on the same page as we approach a delivery point or a measurable. Um,
Yeah.
that starts with that phone call. That starts with that email. That starts with let's grab a cup of coffee and make sure that we have that ongoing relationship as it pertains to a shared client.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think as a banker, what I would say, right, is the best banking relationships that I've had as a banker is when I've had a strong accountant on the other side, because it gives me, like the one thing I've always said in doing deals, right? It's I always look at doing a deal as if it was my own money, right? When I if in the from a lending capacity, right? Or anything that I'm doing, right? Like, would I personally take on this risk or whatever it is? And the one thing that I would say as a banker, it's always been great to have a relationship with you, is because I always know what's coming around the corner, right? There's no, hey, ugh, they're not going to make the covenant the
right.
day before you need to deliver that news, right? We already know. So how do we plan together? But from our relationship, and just to to wrap up what you said, though, which is good, is I think the key points in this banker accounting relationship is be available, right?
Mhm.
Make sure you pick up the phone. Make sure you don't go 48 hours, 24 hours. You should be able to get a response. Quick yes, quick no, not a long maybe. That's the way I put it
Yeah.
out there. And then, like you said too, it's assembling that team of people, right? Because then, you are an extension of the management team from the accounting side, but then I'm an extension of that management team. And that's the one thing that I feel like you and I've always had together is we all realize that we all have a part in this for the client, and we all take it very, very seriously, but it all focuses back on the client. And then, the other thing that I would say, to the bankers that are out there, the one thing that, and I think the reason why our relationship has been so good is it's never been a one-sided thing. I mean, like, let's be honest. You're gonna see, you're talking to, you know, 100 different, clients that you might have, and financing needs come up more often than not. On the banking side, do people does it come across my desk that, like, hey, I have this opportunity? It's a little weird for me now as an investment banker, because I now have accountants calling me all the time, like, hey, so do you need a quality of earnings? And I had somebody send me a gift certificate over the holidays. I didn't even know the person, like, so I
Right.
guess they want my business, which is cool. But at the end of the day, the one thing that I've tried to be really big on is making sure I have my bench of really strong accountants. And obviously, you're captain
Right.
of the team for me, that as those opportunities, if those opportunities come up, hey, I'm gonna at least bring you in to be part of the conversation as much as I can.
Yeah, and I think from the banking side, it's having your eyes open to those opportunities to bring an accountant in, and what are some of those, and is the client complaining about hey, this getting these reviewed financial statements done is really a chore, or you know the report's supposed to be delivered 120 days after the year end, and they're coming up to the wire time after time after time, or they're late and asking for waivers. And is it on the client or is it on the accountant, and saying, hey, maybe we really should talk about this accounting relationship, as to is it really working for you? And looking at what your touch points are and saying, is this the way that those touch points are supposed to be? Um, and that's where you can find opportunities, that you can then, share in a cross referral type relationship. I don't keep score. At the end of the day, my scorecard is are happy clients. If I have a relationship with, with a banker, with a Michael Fisher, that yields a whole bunch of happy clients, then they're my number one referral source. And as long as I can keep them happy, then it's going to keep coming in. And part of that is making sure that they're aligned with the proper professionals that are going to get things done for them, and meet the standard that I expect, and then they expect. And that's really how we work together. Um,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
and I think it's you try to operate it on an island, you're gonna have a lonely life. You surround yourself with the right people, and you surround yourself with the right teams. It's really going to be fruitful for everybody.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, as you know, podcast is called Beyond the Deal, right? So, what I really want to get from you is, can you share a deal, an opportunity, something that you've worked on throughout your 25-year plus career in the accounting field? Makes you seem a lot older than you are, because Steve's actually a pretty young man here, but in your career, what has been something that's been really pivotal for you that you've got to work on that really opened your eyes to something that you got a lot of big takeaways from? Just something that, could be relatable to business owners that are tuning in, or other professionals that are tuning in. What's something that happened in Steve Policeo's career that
Sure.
really was eye-opening for you?
Yeah. So I mean, there's a whole bunch of little things. And that wasn't really prepared for this question, but there's a whole bunch of little things that kind of happen through your career, and at the core of it, the people that do this profession well, from a personality standpoint, are in this profession to help others. That's the reality. And along the way, we get paid, to help other people. And one of my first questions that I always sit down with people, clients, prospects, early on in the relationship, is if we can define success for you, what does it look like? And it's really amazing how many different answers you get to that question. Um, Sometimes it's, I'd like to go on vacation without having to worry about, what's happening in my business. Um, some are, hey, I want to have the biggest multiple I can and exit this thing and ride off into the sunset as a millionaire, and I'm going to be miserable along the way, and I'm fine with that. And then you have other people who are, I don't really know. Um,
Yeah.
so we go back, and it's somebody that you actually know. It's a dog daycare and boarding facility, and it's an interesting success story because I started with him when just when he got done walking dogs, and decided he was going to build a facility, and from that facility it was that he rented, and we built an entire business from this. And I say we because we've been actively, we actively work together on this. We talk weekly. We've become friends along the way. And
Yet you do not own a dog, just for the
yet I
record.
do not have a dog. And much to my wife and rest of family's dismay, we do not have any pets in any way, shape, or form. Um, and I'm probably at the center of that. So but so here we have, a guy, that graduated college, didn't know what he was going to do with his life, and started walking dogs for local neighbors, and fast forward 20 plus years, he now owns the building that he's in. That I helped them structure that deal to acquire that building. In a lease to own type situation, to building his business, to talking to him about raising his rates, to he doesn't make very many decisions without me being involved. And I'm not going to discredit the decisions he makes, but it's we talk on a regular basis. you know we got to the point where hey, let's potentially partner together and open up other facilities. And I'll remember this conversation to this day, where he sat back in his chair and looked at me and said, why would I ever want to do that? I'm good. I come in when I come in. Yeah, I have stresses and I have employees and I own a business. But I make more money than I've ever thought I would ever make in my life. And and being somebody that I'd like to say hustles. I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning for every day for a reason, and because that's how I fit it all in. I don't sleep a lot, not for any other reason that I don't want to.
Yeah.
And to somebody that sits back and is refreshing in perspective and says, "I'm good." I'm 40 something years old. I'm good. Kids' college is paid for. My house is paid for. I have this business. Like, why would I want to do more? um, so it's really, what's the success, what's the impact. The impact is seeing that perspective of somebody that has a bit of an opposite you know type personality. We
Yeah.
we hustle, we go,
Yeah.
it's let's attack. We just came into a new year. What are we going to do in 2025 that's going to be
Yeah.
bigger and better than what we did in 2024? To somebody that, I'm good.
So
So
how did
it's
that change your perspective? Has that changed your perspective at all
it
in your
it
life, your business?
it absolutely has, and it has in the sense of just putting into perspective, the stresses and the stressors and the things that we put on ourselves, and really taking a step back and saying, you know what, in the overall scheme of things, I'm good,
Yeah.
and really having that level of established background. I have a happy and healthy family. I have a variety of things that a lot of people would look at and say, that guy's good.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes you need to remind yourself of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, what are you doing? This is a good, because we're getting into a little bit into fulfillment and satisfaction and all these different things. And I thought that that was a really, really great answer to the question. I have to give you that because I know who you're talking about, obviously. But getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, you know, you're a partner at a very significant, well respected accounting firm in the country, in New Jersey, etc. What are you doing personally to perform at the level that you're performing at?
Sure. So this goes back several years where I wasn't performing at the level that I'm performing at in the sense of an overall human being standpoint. So um, the accounting profession, as much as you can, go out and see clients and be at meetings, is a bit of a sedentary profession. We sit in a chair, we sit at a desk all day. We eat a lot of takeout and fast food. We work some weird hours in most people's perspective. So, part of that is is the juggle of health. I mean, I think we all, at least the professional side, have I've heard stories of accountants having heart attacks at their desk and dying and blah blah blah. So, yeah, I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning because I'm the gym opens at 4:45 and I'm there at 4:46.
Awesome.
And when I squeeze that in every day, and I take a lot of pride in the fact that I'm able to do that. It takes a lot of discipline to wake up every day and do that. A lot of the client relationship stuff, is time consuming, and I can sit there and talk about answering the phone and emails and all that other stuff. But guess what? I get 200 plus emails a day. I can't answer them all. I get 50 text messages a day. Like, it's very hard to answer them all. So balancing all that out and putting health and well being ahead of that. Because quite frankly, where do you get the energy to do this? It starts with that hour in the gym.
That's awesome.
You
I
know,
couldn't agree more. I mean, I hate fitness. I'm not into fitness at all.
well, it's one of those things that I'd like to think we inspire each other, but it's one of those things that I certainly look at you as an inspiration towards. There's some things that I want to do better, relative to diet and discipline and that type of stuff. That a lot of it is centered around what would Michael Fisher do. So
Oh, I listen, I certainly appreciate that, but, for me, it's like, I think it's something that we both realize that to perform at the level that we wanna perform, right? And this is important for all the listeners, to hear is to perform at this high of level, you really need to be personally taking care of yourself so that you can professionally show up.
yeah, and the reality of it is you go to the gym and people think it's a physical act, and you're going to go and you're going to, do cardio, or you're going to lift weights, or you're going to do some combination, and you're going to walk out, fit. The reality of it is there's a significant portion of it that's mental.
Absolutely.
It's the energy. It is enhancing the way your brain works. It is enhancing the
Absolutely.
way the blood flows through your body. It enhances. I don't think anybody ever sat back and said, the gym's really been bad for me. But it's beyond, a physical fitness side, which I think we all can sit back and say we can be better at. There really is a de-stressor. There really is a mental element of it that, I encourage all my staff to. It's part of the process.
Awesome.
So
Awesome. So before we wrap up, we talked a lot about our relationship. We've talked a lot about the professional network that you need to create. We've talked about the banker accounting, relationship. Let's just, take a couple minutes to talk about Citron Cooperman, as an accounting firm. What are the things that kind of separate you guys from other firms that are out there? And then the second part of this question will be what, and I could sit there, I could give the commercial for Steve Poliseo, but I want to hear the Steve Poliseo commercial for people that are out there that might be looking for a new accounting relationship.
sure. So let's talk about, we'll go in your order. So we'll talk about Citron Cooperman first. And
Perfect.
what is Citron Cooperman? Citron Cooperman is, changes every day, but approximately the 15th largest firm in the United States, and that's all well and good. But the reality of it is what makes us different. What makes us different is that we are a middle market firm in our definition of middle market, which is, we deal with startup pre-revenue business owners all the way through, billion-dollar, companies. And we don't really work in the publicly traded realm. We are PCOP registered, but that isn't really where we want to be and what we do. We are the, local, you know type established firm, with brand recognition that, has value, but we can bring to the table a litany of subject area experts from an industry standpoint to, a service level standpoint. And I mentioned it earlier relative to, mergers and acquisitions and transaction advisory and international and state and local, and the list goes on, right down to, IT support and you know and various other things. So, even cybersecurity. Um, so, we can be, for the most part, a one stop shop, bringing those resources to the table you know without losing touch of that local office. We're your accountant type feel. And we'll transition this into me. We're talking about
Can I just
me.
ask a quick question? Real quick question.
Sure.
So I've had the opportunity to meet Niles Citron before.
Yep.
He's actually my brother-in-law's uncle. So, but I'd never gotten a chance to ask this. But when you start digging into Citron Cooperman,
Hmm.
it started in like an apartment in New
Correct.
York with like a couple guys. But I read that it was funded by the seed money from it came from some influential rock bands or
Yes.
something? Can you say who the rock? I mean, I'm a music nerd, so I
Well,
wanna hear, like, how did
it,
this
it,
all come about? And
yeah.
then we can get into Steve Policia. This just sounds really exciting,
and
so
and and I haven't I think Citron is roughly 40 years old as a firm, and I haven't been here for 40 years. So, but from what I understand, is that was initially, funded by the Who. So Niles Citron and Joel Cooperman, started this practice, being, tour accountants and touring accountants. And, bands go on tour, and they needed somebody to, basically do the accounting for that tour. The debits and credits, the money in, the money out, from ticket sales to, t-shirts and various paraphernalia that was sold, on tour, and then making sure everybody got paid. And there's to this day there's a whole business line that is, around that. And so we're founded on, as an entertainment firm, and through organic growth, through merger and acquisition, it's really grown into, a variety of different things. And the greater portion of the firm's revenue is really founded on real estate, and real estate practice. But we have, we are subject matter experts in various industries, and from real estate to construction to manufacturing, distribution to professional services to automobile dealerships specifically to restaurants, hospitality, franchising. Uh, and even on the franchising side, major national and international brands
Yeah.
are and have been clients of ours.
Yeah. So I had to find out who the band was because it doesn't explicitly say. So the Who. So you heard it here first, people.
Yes,
So now
probably not the
now to
first.
the more important question. Um, Tell me about Steve Poliseo. If what how can you be a helpful resource to the listeners out there if someone is struggling, questioning whether they have the right accounting relationship? Why should someone call Steve Poliseo?
Yeah, so I mean, let's talk about from like case study type stuff where who has called me and who are the people that I talk to. A good portion of them are, hey, I've outgrown my accountant. I don't feel as though I'm getting advice. I don't feel as though he's sophisticated. He or she is sophisticated enough to really handle some of the things that I have going on in the business. We bring to the table that level of sophistication in a direct sense, and obviously in a resource sense. Um, you know, I am the one that answers the phone. I am the one that returns the phone calls. I am the one that takes pride in getting back to people as quickly as feasible and possible. Um, and at the same time, I want to be your valued partner as a business owner. And when I say business owner, that carries over to a household as well. You know, how are you, your spouse, financially maneuvering through life and major decisions to you know vacation properties to I want to move or in state, out of state. Um, hey, I just got a new job. How do I fill out my W-4?
Yeah.
Um, you know,
I think why you and I really resonated with each other, right, is because we both were, even though you professionally have been a tax accountant,
mhm,
right, by trade, you're really an accountant, a holistic accountant from personal questions to business questions. And that's
correct.
the same thing that I've always tried to do with me. It's like, even though I've been in a commercial banker, now I'm a managing director of an investment bank and I work on mergers act, all this kind of stuff, right? But I'm a banker by trade. And I can help people whether it comes to your home mortgage all the way up to selling your company, right? And that's the one thing that I've always seen with you.
Yeah, and that's true. I'm an
Yeah.
accountant by trade.
Yeah.
My greater skill set and expertise is on the tax side. But I can still talk to you about your financial statements, your compilation, your review, your audit. I can still talk to you about your covenants. I can still go over your banking relationships. We just have it's an industry that and a profession that if somebody can honestly sit down in front of you and say, I know all of it, then they're lying to you. There's so many significant complexities um, to the details, to the changes, to it was the tax law changes every day, and we're on the cusp of more tax law change, whether it's through sunset of the current provisions or through rewrite of the tax code as we have it, which there's going to be a combination of both that's going to happen in the next 12 to 24 months. We slash I bring that to the table and as proactive an approach as we possibly can.
Excellent.
Knowing our clients and knowing what affects you on a day-to-day basis.
Excellent. Well, listen, I really appreciate, you taking the time today. You know, the one thing I wanted to ask you before we wrap up is there one thing that you could see, in your career, in your time left on this earth, right? What is one thing that you either have accomplished or want to accomplish? Like, I mean, what is something that you're going to be able to say at the end of your days, you know, was success for you? Is there something that you personally really want to accomplish?
I mean, on the professional side, it's really, find success for many of my clients and colleagues as I possibly can. Because I truly believe if you help other people find success, you'll find success along the way. Um,
Absolutely.
so that's my legacy. That's what I want to carry along. Um, on the personal side, I'm a, I'm a father of four. I just want to leave them in a better place than they started. That's what any parent, hopefully, knock on wood, would want to do. And that's not necessarily a financial motivation, although that would be nice. But it really has a human being and pushing my kids. The oldest is soon to be 18, and my youngest is 4. Pushing them into being the best human beings they could possibly be.
Awesome.
I'd like to be 80 years old one day, looking back and saying, you know what, I did something right because my kids turned out. So,
Good answer. Good answer. So where can people find you, Steve?
so where can you find me? I'm in Florham Park all day, every day. No, it's um, you know, call, email, S Poliseo at Citron Cooperman. Call. Hey, I'll put my cell phone out on public information, but
Okay. We'll put it all in the show notes. So
100%. So,
yeah.
but yeah, where can you find me? You through Michael Fisher through.
Yeah, just call Michael Fisher and we'll get there. Steve, you're a friend and I can't say enough good things about you. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
No, thank you.
And I think people are going to get a lot out of this. So
I hope
have
so.
a good big 2025, sir.
Yeah, you as well. Thanks.